what kind of stuff have you been testing that you're really excited about?
Well, the big one I'm super excited about is this 1980s Alciphon experiment with nuclear spin alignments and testing whether that nuclear spin and nuclear magnetic resonance might have something to do with gravitation, testing what gravitation is. There's lots of theories on what gravity is, and we don't really have a full, agreed upon theory, I would say, about what gravity actually is. So there's a lot of different theories that are floating around with our scientists. And this one is particularly about spin alignment. It was by a guy named Frederick Alciphon and an aerospace company called Boeing Aerospace did some testing on this back in the 80s. And I want to test this with some of these new materials that have come out in these recent FOIA reports called spin glasses. And spin glasses, it's like a way that a glass is not like a crystal. It's has all kinds of random alignments of the molecules inside the structure. This is a spin glass is like a random alignments of the magnetic structure of the material. So it has a completely random and mixed up magnetic structure. And these types of materials might be better for producing skins that are skins of craft that like could maybe be if it works as anti-gravity when you hit them with the right frequencies or whatever. So we're going to try a lot of those experiments. We're just doing it with magnetic resonance for now and microwaves, and we have a couple different frequencies of microwave we're going to try to use and hope, and particularly ones that the way the wavelength interacts with the material that we're testing. And
so ultimately the idea is you hope to remove these structures from gravitational influence?
Or see if the gravitational influence changes at all based on what we're doing to the optical and magnetic properties of the material.
And you'd be able to tell that by a change in weight?
Yeah, if the weight changes, or if the thing flies off the table. Right? So there's a lot of ideas for that. There's a lot of ideas for alternative propulsion going around right now, and trying to just hear out all different sides and perspectives on this, because there's a lot of scientists saying no, it doesn't work, and there's a lot of scientists saying, oh yes, it does, and this is a cover up. So it's interesting time. It's an interesting time for this particular field.
And you've been sort of doing these experiments and running a lab in your garage for a while now, right?
All right, so let me go back to this. I have a little. I don't really have much of a lab here or a garage here. I live in an apartment right now in Rhode Island, but I teamed up with a couple other people, several different groups of researchers that have their own labs and are interested in getting involved with this research. And so there's been a couple different laboratories that have I've teamed up with and gone down to and visited and done some experiments with. So
I guess I'm just trying to fill in some of our listeners as to sort of what your method is and how you've kind of been running this experimental lab. Can't think of a better word than lab.
Yeah, it's like a whole bunch of scientists that already have that do a lot of this research online. They're not really super popular. A lot of them are really obscure in one way or another. I mean, as far as views go, they're not getting millions of views, maybe a couple thousand or 100, some of them. So I reached out to a lot of these guys, tried to get them on for conversation, to share information, share ideas, and also to share ideas for experiments and watch their experiments as well. There was a group, some of the guys that I've teamed up with, they've been good. Some of them, I feel like they've been, going in a direction that's kind of a waste of time, in my opinion, because there's a lot of physics and knowledge and engineering knowledge that a lot of people don't have or understand. And that's kind of what we're trying to, trying to educate people, but it's a lot of material. It's a lot of stuff. Theoretical physics is probably one of the hardest things you can do if you really want to do, something that's hard. There's a lot of material to know and a lot of material to study. I'm still learning, always learning new stuff all the time. And it's so broad of a field it's hundreds of over 100 years old, since it really became a really competitive, heavy field of mathematics and science about 100 years ago. And since then, it's just evolved. There's no way you could learn it all or study it and know it all in one lifetime. In fact, you find all kinds of mainstream scientists rediscovering work that they say, look what I figured out, and then it goes to peer review, and other scientists are like, oh well, this is just something Dirac figured out in 1920. You didn't read this paper. And it's like, oh, it's like this stuff's, a lot of it's, you find that like it's people rediscovering stuff that's already in the literature and that they just missed, or that got like, I don't know, just different. It didn't get, it wasn't well understood at the time, and just got lost or something.
Well, that's kind of the crisis of science, right? So you point to the YouTube algorithm and you're like, well, these are their ideas that are getting buried because people aren't being fed these ideas, but the algorithm is just a more modern development on how information was passed along in previous generations, right? So if an idea doesn't catch in people's minds, it just vanishes, like it never happened.
Right. And that a lot of these ideas were thought up by some of these really smart philosophers and scientists, decades ago. And whatever reason, they got lost in the academic algorithm that kept, whatever academia's interests were. At the time, over the years, that these things sort of disappeared from the curriculum or whatever, for whatever reason. And
well, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of time in graduate education on Earth for scientists to be studying the history of the discipline. So it's kind of like dive into the front lines and start working on something that you could get a grant for. And it's not really a lot of energy or space for retrospection.
Or for working on something that might not work out in the next year or so, right? So if you're looking for alternative propulsion systems, that's maybe a lifetime of work.
A little risky.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could be working on this for the rest of your life, and then and that's the thing I like to stress to my team members, because this field does also attract a lot of people with really large egos, and it's like, you got to keep people's egos in check, because it's like they think you don't know that you feel so sure about something, but I don't rest that sort of surety in anything that I do, like to the way that I've had some people come in the group and be so confident that in the next 3 months we're going to figure this out, and we're going to get funding, and this investment capital is going to come into this, and then it's just going to take off from there. And I tell them, I was like, this people have been working on this for a long time, and there's a lot of old timers in this group even that have gotten millions of dollars in grants and funding and done lots of research for a lot of high-end companies and high-end corporations, and a lot of them have a lot better academic credentials and scientific understandings than us. And you're thinking that we're going to do this in the next 3 months, and then also, like, some people, I've had even other people in the group that have been even more wild, claiming that this Messiah complex, like they're the next coming of Christ, or the coming of the next, or the real Jewish Messiah or whatever, coming to bring this technology out to save all of humanity, and that there's some sort of religious goal involved and stuff. It's gotten kind of crazy with the egos and stuff that some of these people that get involved, and trying to keep them in check, because it's kind of it's kind of like I don't have faith that there's people on the team that believe that, our government already figured this out in the 1950s, right? They give a date 1954 or 55.
Why do
and
they give that date?
There's a whole bunch of reasons. I'm actually working on a documentary and putting together like a little mini documentary about these varying theories of the secret space program, and that the government already figured this out and they've been covering it up for years. So if that's true, then it's going to be it's going to be relatively easy to reproduce an anti-gravity machine in the laboratory, right? So far, it's not been easy. So I lean on the side that, maybe this is the hardest problem in physics and it hasn't quite been figured out yet. But there's people on the team that believe that no, modern physics is disinformation. It was purposely, derailed and sent off the wrong track by physicists who figured this out for real in the 50s and wanted to mislead the rest of the community so that they wouldn't figure this out ever. And
why would they want to do that? What's the motivation?
The motivation would be, to hide weapons technology from the world, and free energy and anti-gravity mainly. Is that it was the same bankers that didn't fund Tesla's wireless power transmission devices are the same guys that that's the conspiracy theory anyway.
Like standard transport is so lucrative that why open up another cheaper alternative?
Yeah, and especially one that competes with oil and transportation too. So, and also like from an intelligence perspective, they said like, well, this technology, if you had warp drive technology and free energy, you could basically destroy the entire Earth if you wanted to, and they don't want to have anyone trust anyone with that sort of power, in case they.
Well, it's funny because there's already enough power in the arsenals of the world to destroy the world over. It seems like people might not actually want to destroy the world, right?
It would look like that. It would also seem, the whole Cuban Missile Crisis with Kennedy. He very much tried hard not to destroy the world during that.
Nobody wants to be that guy, but, the few survivors will forever curse your name. You wouldn't be cast very well in the mythology of whatever happens after the collapse.
Right.
But do you think that this technology, so let's say anti-gravity technology, you said that there's some people that show up with a messiah complex. Do you think that it would change everything for humanity, or would it just be, I don't know, another technology, like an iPhone sort of thing?
Like you have some anti-gravity technology already, right? You already have
there is a little bit of there is a little bit of technology out there that's kind of cutting edge, and I think the engineering difficulties of a lot of these things, as we're finding out, the engineering problems are really are difficult to overcome, and
like the material questions and the
materials aren't there yet. We have to develop better, infrastructure for producing these materials so that we can make it cheaper and find new, there needs to be a market there for these types of materials first, in order for there to be innovation in the manufacturing and production process. As more people get into that, is what I feel, and it's not quite there yet. It could be there with the help of like a billionaire like Elon Musk, I believe. Like if I've tried to reach out to Elon and stuff, say he should have a warp drive division, so that they can work on, at least have somebody at SpaceX working on this or doing research on this and accumulating, data and or something on it. And I say, hey, listen, I'll work for free because I'm already doing it. But it'd be great to. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not.
Is he writing you back?
I don't think so. I don't know. I haven't heard back from him yet. So it is what it is. We're just doing what we can.
What about this Bigelow guy? You know him?
So yeah, I've heard of Bob Bigelow. I don't know him personally.
We interviewed a lady that worked for him for a while. Maybe you'd
Yeah,
have
didn't
some
he
luck.
just? Oh yeah, didn't he lay off like 84 of his employees last March, right after COVID? So a lot of people, a lot of all his entire staff, I think, is out of work right now.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that they closed the entire facility.
I think she went over to NASA afterwards.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, I heard that they built this whole facility down at Bigelow to receive and get the contract to analyze these alien UFO metals, these metals that have been retrieved from UFOs and kept in the Material Command, what was AFIT and is now NASIC at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Material Command, and I
This
think
is the
that.
stuff from the 1950s?
I have one particular document from 1952, September 18th, 1952, and it's a piece of metal that was recovered from, was it in Denmark? There was a NATO carrier group naval exercise done by NATO, and they saw there was a UFO sighting during this naval exercise, very similar to that Nimitz encounter, where they saw this UFO, they saw a flying saucer. The saucer went and it was hovering over a certain part of land, and then it dropped a piece of metal from it, and then it took off. And they actually went out and recovered this piece of metal that Denmark's intelligence agency or the military. There's a whole chain of command in this document. I was going over it the other night, and so there's a whole chain of command in that document. So there's metals that have been recovered, and they're in possession of the military right now. The chain of command went to Germany, and then it came to the U.S. military through those channels. So there is that evidence of one piece from the 50s. There might be other incidents and other debris from earlier incidents, and there's a large continued suspicion among a lot of Americans that in the 1947 Roswell crash was actually some alien debris was recovered there, and so there's a debate still going and raging about that, and whether it was alien or whether it was top secret programs or whether what it was.
Is there any debate as to whether or not it actually happened? Or is the only debate about whether or not it was alien technology? Do you know?
Yeah, so the Air Force says it definitely. There was definitely an unidentified flying object event of a crash, something that crashed out in Roswell. I mean, no, it wasn't actually in Roswell. It was in Corona, New Mexico, believe it or not, northwest of Roswell. Roswell is just a nearby Army airfield, and the military admits to that, but they say that it was actually a weather balloon from Project Mogul that was misidentified, and that's all it was. So there's a number of witnesses who reported some of the material from the crash site, including people afterwards who handled the debris and looked at the material in hangars at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Is this Bob Lazar, is his name?
No, that's not Bob.
This is much earlier, I think.
Oh, okay, sorry.
This is there's a number of people that it was written about in the 80s. Stanton Friedman, Don Schmidt, and Daniel Moore. No, what's the guy's name? Moore. William Moore, Bill Moore. These authors from a lot of the stuff came out in the 80s, and that sparked a lot of public interest in the Roswell case, which led to the 1994 U.S. Air Force report as a response to that. To quell the rumors that this was aliens. It's just a weather balloon. Look. So yeah, there's a lot of people that I'm not so sure about it. I don't have any beliefs or opinions on it one way or the other than that, looks like the metals went to a company in Ohio called Battelle, and they've been kind of like keeping track of they've been in charge of all our national labs for the last 70 plus years, and they manage all the national labs. So anything that gets invented or goes on, any projects that happen, anything that happens there it's done under the eyes of this one company that is basically, it is a private institution that's unreachable by Freedom of Information Act requests. So we talked about, well, how do I get a lot of information? How do we get, in our country, in America, journalists and scientists and any researcher, any kind of information nerd is going to use what's called the Freedom of Information Act request, where they can actually petition and file government agencies for information. So, say there's just a shooting that happened or a robbery, you can file a Freedom of Information Act request to get the data and the videos from the police to show that of the robbery, if you choose to do so you can get the video of it.
But not all of it, or all of it. Is there stuff that's redacted or classified?
There is certain information that gets redacted and classified, and for different reasons, to protect individuals who are involved, or who don't want to be associated or involved with it. And there's also, and that happens a lot with Freedom of Information Act requests that we've done, for government files related to this. But it kind of really reaches this black hole around this one company that should have a lot of information, but it, of course, is untouchable by FOIA and unreachable. So it's certainly interesting that they manage all the national labs in the U.S. for all those projects.
Well, this sort of gets at a bigger issue that's going on with the outsourcing of sort of untouchable processes, right? Seems like more and more in your country, defense projects are outsourced to private security, and waste disposal, power. I think there was a really interesting power snafu over there in the United States. It's kind of weird because you have these private companies that deliver power to your citizens, but it's not like the citizens can actually choose on the market for a different power company if their power company sucks or something.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of that here. At PG&G in California, and then what happened in Texas over February, and back in late February, it was a couple weeks ago that they had the ice storms and stuff in Texas, and the brownouts, a lot of power went out there. Then also, here I don't have a choice between my electrical provider. There's only one on the market, and they can charge whatever rate they want. And if I don't want to pay it, I don't get electricity. So it is kind of crazy.
Do you think that it's always been that way, or is it on the rise in your country? Sort of lack of accountability and corporate, stealthiness.
Well, you got to understand the modern electrical grid is the oldest and most complex network, it's the most complex machine in existence on the planet today, arguably. The electrical grid. It is very much like a machine. It is a grid network that was, it's constantly being outdated and updated and replaced, and it's insanely complicated and complex, even for the people that work on it all the time, and it's not an easy problem, and there's a lot of issues with different power production. We could do nuclear, but nuclear has harmful byproducts that cost a lot of money to dispose of, and they don't go away right away. There's some types of clean nuclear, like thorium salts and stuff that people have talked about. But then, of course, you're, limiting to the thorium supply in the world, which is in East Asia, I believe. And there's a whole controversy over that. And so, well, we can't just make the whole thorium market, because then thorium's going to go through the roof.
I think you can get it from seawater. I could be wrong about that.
You can get a lot of stuff from seawater, actually. There's a lot of stuff in seawater. It's quite an ocean out there. But yeah, I'd like to see more of alternative. We have electric grids and stuff, and a lot of electrical, like solar technology. Sorry, we have a lot of like photovoltaics and solar technology, and also wind technology and stuff. But there needs to be I think there needs to be updates to our photovoltaic systems and our methods of producing energy, and also our requirements too need to go down, because we base a lot of our energy consumption needs on electronics that are essentially outdated and could be replaced with a lot better stuff. And it's kind of
I
a weird
hear that
conundrum.
argument very often.
There's a weird conundrum too, yeah, because U.S. electronics are always, subpar. For the most part, are subpar to the electronics produced over in Asia, and a lot of the infrastructure and manufacturing has gone over to Asia and overseas in the past, 20, 30, 40 years, and meanwhile, the electronics industry in the U.S. and the semiconductor industry is really like gone under. So it's a difficult time right now. But if we had better, more efficient superconductors and computer chips, we could certainly cut down on our power needs through active consumption. Then of course the power grid, there's a rate for what normal usage, 8 to 9 to 5 is peak power consumption. So if you're using your computer at night, right now I'm paying a lower bill to use this electricity because we're after 5 o'clock. And there's less demand on the electrical grid right now for power. So I'm actually paying a lower rate right now than I would be if I'm using power and working during the day. And that's
Have you seen these companies? I think they're like out in San Francisco where they use that cheap power window to spool up these giant flywheels and store a bunch of kinetic energy in these huge spinning discs, and then they sort of just let them rip during the day.
Wow.
Yes, because they can charge them up for pennies on the dollar at the at night when it's not peak rate, and then they can use that energy during the day when the rate is higher. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they have engineers that did the calculations and determined that they'd be saving money from building all that infrastructure to do this. Then I see that.
Now,
and,
what's your thoughts? Do you follow the fusion pursuit?
So you mean what they're doing with fusion energy right now?
Yeah, are you hopeful for that? Do you have any friends who are looking into it, or? So
there's a couple different people working on different types of fusion and understanding, so there's, I think France, what's the company in France that's building the big tokamak reactor? There's a
Le Tokamak.
Le Tokamak, France. If you look up Tokamak, France, it's called ITER. Yeah, ITER. So that was started in I think 2007. It said, and so they're doing some work over there. That's the most mainstream one I know of out there for hot fusion. But then there's a bunch of scientists that are working on crystallic or cold fusion or lattice-assisted nuclear reaction, whatever you want to. There's a lot of different words that people call it, but apparently there's fusion that takes place inside of the confines of crystal lattices and structural lattices of materials and certain types of metals with other types of atoms doped into them. One is palladium metal cathode with deuterium or hydrogen, which fuses to make helium.
Are you hopeful about any of these?
I am pretty hopeful. NASA just released a report in August 2020 on some of their new cold fusion research. If you look up NASA Cold Fusion 2020, you'll find a study on some of them that NASA is now interested in looking into this because potentially, cold fusion would be a lot better, a lot easier and a lot better than doing hot fusion, because hot fusion has been a problem that they've thrown hundreds of millions of dollars at, built very expensive equipment. Decades and decades of research has gone into hot fusion, and they've not produced a net positive machine that can produce a net energy, net fusion energy for what they have to put into it to get the actual physics to happen. They're not getting back the energy out of it. And with low energy nuclear reaction, might be worth funding at this point. There's a lot of people, thinking about it and talking about it, but there hasn't been any, we are competing for a limited pool of resources as physicists. And so you don't want to throw money at every idea. You can't. And some of these ideas, get lost in the mix because they get called like crackpot, science. Like cold fusion was labeled crackpot science and has been for the past for almost 40 years now. And
that's a really interesting word, man. There on Earth, it's like the new version of heretic or something. Like I feel like the church used to just point fingers at people and throw them on a fire or something. And
burn them.
What's up with that? Is this just a holdover from your sort of tribal evolutionary roots, where it's like that person's not one of us, burn them, something like that? Or I mean, what are people afraid of? They're afraid of the information ecology becoming contaminated.
Money going to other projects, presumably?
Yeah, is it like a zero-sum thing? Is it a stain contamination thing? Is this about purity? Is this about the sanctity of science?
You know, from my experience with any human that's participating in this on the human level is that we're all influenced by a combination of all these things, really. And it could be even other issues as well, other things. Maybe they just didn't like the scientist who came out and he's getting more popularity than them. You know, it could be any number of things. But generally, you know, in science, at least we have some sort of degree of our threshold to a standardization to adhere to. But I think that, you know, in the 40 years since cold fusion underwent that first I don't know, public flogging, I would call it. Yes, they did. You know, it's kind of like they took this straw man, propped it up in front of the public, and beat the crap out of it, and then said, "There, cold fusion is dead." and then now here we are, 40 years later, and NASA's reluctantly admitting, it's not dead. We kind of made a breakthrough.
It's fascinating that they were working on it, though. If it was viewed as something that wasn't worth pursuing, what is that about?
I feel like a lot of the attitudes changed in the last 10 years, really, the last decade. You know, and I hope that I've helped with that a little bit too, because I promoted this. I went to this cold fusion conference and this IAP course at MIT here in Boston, and I went and actually filmed that and put it online, and I got a bunch of people super interested in cold fusion, and I'm hoping that it at least opens some doors in other people's minds, because I know I saw a couple other articles on it. It didn't really hit the mainstream, you know, but we put it out there enough. I feel like it hit this undercurrent hard enough that, you know, there started to be some people like, wait a minute, I'm going to start opening my eyes a little bit more to what's going on here. And well, hey, wait a minute, let me read some of these guys' papers and check out this work that they're doing after they saw some of these presentations and realized, wow, these guys really do good science. They're really, you know, doing real science. They're not pseudoscientists. They're not charlatans and people just trying to get funding and pay for their, you know, experiments or whatever. They're so they can have a livelihood from this and stuff. So
sorry, we're talking to somebody about pseudoscience a couple of weeks from now. And I was just wondering, do you have a definition for that word? Like, how do you define pseudoscience? Where's the line between something that's scientific and something that's pseudoscience?
Right. I guess everyone goes to Popper, right? Yeah, the scientist. Falsifiability is what he determined, but it's not just that. It's you know, because you can have a theory that's scientific, but it's not falsifiable, and you can have falsifiable theories that aren't scientific. So I think it's what I would just call pseudoscience is that it has, I believe you have to, the best test, of course, is experiments. But certain things are, again, unfalsifiable, and you have to, I don't know, it's definitely a strange world. And I think that the only law of physics that you could nail down definitely is that as soon as you nail down a law of physics, they change on you.
Well, there's this other issue too we always come across with Earthlings, which is like you have these beautiful descriptions of natural phenomena, right? So you have this old dude, Newton, who gave these beautiful mathematical relationships of how the planets move about one another and how the planets move around the star. But there's no real mechanism given for what causes that motion. It's like, okay, they go around in circles, and the strength of that attraction varies in some proportion to distance. But why is that? And it's very interesting on Earth how there's not too much of a priority given to that kind of mechanistic thought. It's more just like, can we describe what's happening with greater and greater and greater and greater and greater accuracy?
Well, if I can interrupt here, I think that something that comes from that, or maybe it comes from this.
Drives it?
What?
Maybe what drives it even.
Maybe what drives it is that there are people who really seem to genuinely think that reality is made of math. Right?
Like tables are made out of equations and stuff?
Or, well, okay, so if you go and you listen to somebody tell you what a quantum field is, a quantum field that everything is made out of is vectors, which is equations.
Tensors, yeah, or a higher rank than a vector. So a tensor, or so this is what we call the empirical argument in science, or like, and it basically says that there's an argument that says that just because you can use a differential equation to describe the motion of something doesn't mean that it's doing that calculation to produce that motion. Right. So just because you can get empirical, relationships and empirical formulas in science to describe things doesn't mean that's the essence of what's happening, right?
Or the cause,
or the cause of what's happening. You're just finding a convenient way of describing it, and in terms of position and time, right?
It seems like, going back to that idea of pseudoscience, like there's usually this undercurrent of bad faith in somebody who's genuinely being accused of pseudoscience. It's like they're not willing to look at evidence that's in conflict with whatever theory they're promoting. I think there's like sort of this attitude of bad faith that's being accused as well. What do you think?
The people that are calling pseudoscience, you mean like if I'm a scientist and I'm saying, well, that's just pseudoscience, is that what you're talking about? Like,
I think so. I'm just trying to understand, or what it's like to be doing. If you're a pseudoscientist, what does that mean? I mean, does anyone actually think that they're a pseudoscientist, or is it just a pejorative term that scientists use to hurt each other's feelings or something?
But it's like the difference between a magician and a con artist, right? So the magician in this case would be the scientist. The con artist would be the pseudoscientist.
Yeah, it's like you can see what he's doing or something.
It's like, well, and then what point does, so the scientists that get paid to do a study for Big Pharma, for example, and then the results of the study, they turn out that they're normally skewed in 75% of their literature. The reports are skewed in the favor of the people giving them the funding or something. There was
but that could never be pseudoscience, right? Because it's coming from a powerful position.
Is that pseudoscience? Do we call those American medical scientists in the Journal of American Medical Science that reports these sort of statistics of medical industry findings in conjunction with funding in medical science? That do we call all the scientists who did those studies pseudoscientists?
It doesn't seem like it.
Well, it would be
That's kind of what I'm getting at. Is it seems like it's a sort of power term. Like it doesn't actually mean anything except for I'm more powerful than you and I don't like what you're doing.
Yeah, because pseudoscience is almost exclusively a term that's leveraged by those inside the establishment. Is that fair to say?
Right, because I look at you have bad and good ideas, and you have wrong ideas, and you have more correct ideas in science. But just to label everyone as someone as pseudoscience because they have a couple bad ideas, I don't know. That happens a lot too. I see that too. So I find a lot of these guys, I don't have to. I bring people on my show, right? Scientists. There's PhDs that I don't agree with everything that they say. I don't have to agree with everything that everyone I bring on my show says. In fact, I'd rather have a disagreement of ideas.
It's certainly more interesting than just nodding along the entire time.
And I don't like to take, even the person who I would consider the biggest pseudoscience, there's still some good information sometimes. You can still find even the biggest, frauds out there. There's sometimes a kernel of truth in that stuff. So you can't just, oh, this person said one thing that I disagree with, or that's a bad idea, therefore I'm going to call them a pseudoscientist and ban them from the Church of Science.
And that's what's really scary, is the idea that conversations might get shut down just because someone's being silenced because, well, they're pseudoscientists.
I was kind of thinking along sort of shamanistic lines. You said the Church of Science, and I immediately thought of the way that humans deal with something like schizophrenia, where in previous ages it was viewed as, sure, it's a form of insanity, but it's an insanity that connects you to the divine world of spirits. And the person with schizophrenia, you might actually be able to learn something from them if you were to listen. And now it's just shunted to the edges of society, because people are afraid maybe that it's infectious or that it'll contaminate them somehow. And it seems like the same with these scientific ideas. In the Church of Science, there's no room for an alternative hypothesis, maybe because it threatens the status of the church to open up too many avenues of investigation.
I just, it's not quite the same structure as the Roman Catholic Church. There is a lot of, it's an interesting dilemma what's going on right now. And then there also is people that don't understand the science, that they're calling out that there's people that are, I would say, almost like if we're going to call someone a pseudoscientist, there are people that literally don't have the credentials but pretend to be scientists and pretend to be saying that they're thinking scientifically about stuff. But then again, it's just, you could just be like, well, okay, well, they're wrong and they're not, educated on this certain thing. And no one knows everything. No one has all encompassing, knowledge of all. There are some real big whales out there in terms of knowledge, that of people that just know tons of stuff and are super, up on their knowledge. But and there are people out there that are, if you're attempting science, real science, you're engaging in the debate and you're actually engaging in experiments and stuff. I guess that makes you a scientist, right? But if you're stringing things along and then using scanty data and skewing your statistics and your results to make sure your conclusions match your hypothesis, then I don't think that's science. And maybe that is what a pseudoscientist is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like those people definitely, who falsify data and so forth, they'll definitely be attacked in the academy on Earth, but
eventually
they'll rarely be called a pseudoscientist. It's a really interesting sort of class term. I just can't get enough of it.
Oh, it's a guild term.
Yeah, it's guild thing.
It's rare that you have a credential and you've entered the guild that you can be called a pseudoscientist.
Yeah.
It's only the people that haven't gone through the gilding process or have turned their back on the gilding process that are called pseudoscientists.
Yeah, like even if you're an adjunct professor or something, at least you're in the system, It's like, probably won't be called, they might call you a crappy scientist.
They might call you an adjunct, but they won't call you a pseudoscientist.
Right.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and I think that if you don't have alternative ideas in science, the field sort of stagnates and it can get really, boring and dull and old. And I hope that, while there's, some people that come on my channel and leave one comment that says pseudoscience and that's all they say. There's a lot of people on there that are like, hey, this is like interesting stuff, like I'm actually, I'm getting me to think outside the box on a lot of these things. And maybe that's not a bad idea. You know, I could be wrong, that's all right. I can think outside the box and be like, well, that's silly and that's not going to work. And let's try it. No, it doesn't work. But I don't know. I feel like that. I don't feel like I'm doing a disservice to science at all with by trying to shake things up. I mean, it's the worst. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I could be wrong. Oh well.
I love that.
Yeah, definitely.
So what's next for you guys? Are you trying to expand your laboratory, or where do you go from here?
Trying to get the right team. We have a good team together already. Trying to just refine it down and get like a good spot where we can all do the experiments that we want to do and find a place where we can collaborate. And I've been trying to reach out to a lot more businesses and companies that are doing some interesting manufacturing and research and resources and stuff to see if there is any room for collaboration or partnerships in that regards, because I feel like it's going to take the help of an existing business that has infrastructure that's already set up to do something similar, so that we can't really just start from nothing and the ground up. We have to find someone out there who's already doing something similar and is interested, and so that's kind of what we're going with it. Just gradually trying to reach out to more people, do more interviews, and get and build the audience, build the network of people who are interested in pursuing alternative propulsion and doing experiments with it, because it's a big and growing community, as we found, and there's more and more people coming out of the woodwork all the time, including including a lot of these older gentlemen who came from these programs that, even if it's some guy that convinced Boeing to give him, $10,000 in grant money to try out some stupid idea. Oh, well, we'll bring him on and see what he has to say and see how his idea worked and went, and what's the harm in that? It's like, here, this is part of history. It was, you never heard about it because it's, so obscure and that you would never know it existed. But here I'm trying to bring history out. And so what if it's a 40-year-old idea that didn't work? It's still worth showing, because someone else might have that idea, 10 years from now and be like, oh, let me look this up. And then, oh, wait, I found out a guy that had this idea a long time ago and it didn't work. So it's not a waste of time for me to do this and publish it, even if it gets called pseudoscience by someone who's sees that as the first introduction to my channel and is like, well, this guy's wrong, I don't need to watch anything else on this guy's channel. No, we have a lot of other content, and I don't know, it's quite a game.
I think that you have to oh, sorry.
When you have so much information and it's all about first impressions and the people who have 10-minute attention spans, thanks to modern media and stuff, so it's difficult. So I think I need to do more condensed summaries of breaking down this stuff. But for right now, it's good to get big information dumps, because it's all fresh and new information, and it's good to throw it all on the table, and then we can sit there in the next year or two and mull this, put it through the food processor and refine out the chunks that that we can put into 3-minute, 5-minute digestible chunks for people so that they don't get bored and don't have to sift through all the pseudoscience to get to the real science. So.
Yeah, it might sort of help people find the particular material they're really interested in too. I mean, that was like one of the amazing things that's happened with information on your planet in general, is like, you start off with everybody having web pages that are kind of unrelated and unconnected, or before that, even just books and libraries, and all the libraries are disconnected. And eventually you get to the point where now you have incredible search engine, but that's a different matter. But you really had to find a way to dig through all that data. And I suppose that's kind of what you're talking about, is finding a way to synthesize all the little pieces that you've learned over the years and direct people into the right funnels.
And to help people find things, because there's just such a huge amount of information that's available, even on your channel. Like, many of your videos are really, really technical presentations on very difficult to understand subjects. And somebody can show up and get a sense of, well, this isn't what they're doing at, Boeing right now. And so that must mean that it's fringe, and I don't understand it, so see you later, pseudoscience. But giving people the opportunity to encounter it in a simpler way is maybe necessary in order to actually kind of pique their curiosity enough to get them to understand that Boeing isn't the only place where this sort of research can happen. You can actually do the research on your own, which is incredible. The fact that you have a platform where you've gathered people together that are interested in this subject, and now you've actually gone from talking about it on the internet and conferences to testing it, like, that's amazing.
It's pretty rad. I wouldn't be so hard on yourself.
No, thanks, man. I appreciate the compliments and stuff, and I just feel like we have so much further to go, and and it gets discouraging sometimes when people on my team think that this is going to happen in the next couple of months, and I'm hopeful, right? I hope that happens, but I'm not. I'm optimistic, right? But I'm not gonna bank on it, right? I'm not gonna be like, oh, well, this is definitely going to happen. I'm ready for this to be a long haul, for this to be, something that goes on for 10 years until we get, the infrastructure set up to actually get the right materials and build something that might work. But, there's a lot of hope too, that we could figure this out because, there's so much evidence of these craft out there that have these capabilities, and more evidence comes out all the time, that I just feel like there's these things are being seen out there. There's that they have these capabilities that we're observing. It can't be impossible, right? It can't be impossible. We're seeing it. Is this unless these things are illusions or they're manifestations of some sort of more complex program that's making us see these things that aren't there. But I doubt it, because those technologies couldn't exist. These things go back to the 50s, that when these technologies didn't exist, they didn't have these capabilities to do Mach 9, Mach 10 things and do 90-degree turns. And these things have been seen, they're documented going back decades and decades before this technology really existed within the public sphere. So there's the whole debate of whether this is all, aliens are just a cover for, domestic projects on technology and domestic technologies and domestic experimental craft, right? There's that whole debate of that the Mirage Men, that the U.S. government spread these alien stories to cover up for their own secret programs. Mm-hmm. But then there's evidence of these craft that go back and predate, any kind of programs that would have been able to produce anything like this. So it's hard to take that completely at face value either, unless there's something else we don't know about. So it's certainly an interesting debate, but I think that there's hope for us having a breakthrough at some point, just based on what we see around us, and then also the scientific information that's come out through these FOIAs and stuff over the last few years. So much information has come out that I really feel like we're not far off from knowing the whole truth and getting it all out. I don't know.
This is maybe one of the strongest arguments for carrying this society forward, right? Because if the world falls apart, so do all of these attempts to come up with cleaner energy sources, new propulsion systems. This is all very dependent on social stability in some way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's very possible society could collapse in the next, couple decades, and this is pretty much our last chance to get these technologies out of these black programs and into the real world and onto drawing boards at real companies, rather than, it's just crazy. I go back to the 1950s and watch some of the stuff that, Disney and NASA and stuff were putting out on what the future was going to be like, and to see what they thought about way back then, and how, where did we go wrong? It just stopped. It just like we after the challenge, it seems like after the Challenger, people were just, Americans were just bored of space launches and the whole space program, and they're like, all right, what's in this for me? How's this going to get me a brand new flat screen TV? And like, I don't care about this stuff no more. I want everyone's super concerned with themselves, their own lives, and their custom kitchens and delivery. Right.
Well, I also feel like real wages in your country didn't really increase since that point too. So there's like some very legitimate concerns about how you're going to pay for a kitchen at all.
Well, it's really crazy because all the boomers basically bought out all the land and jacked up the property rates. So we're paying, more in rent now than we would for a mortgage, but no one can save up enough money to get a mortgage or get a house anymore, because it's just the way the whole system's rigged. And a lot of millennials and Gen Xers and people in this new generation of kids growing up feel that way. It's just like, it's kind of a weird time to be alive, but there's also I like to not look at all the negatives, because you have to look at, like, there's so much opportunity in the world right now. You could look at it in the next 5 years and 10 years, the amount of new businesses that are going to come out and grow and become huge entities, and the amount of potential that humanity has right now in all these little areas, it's incredible. And I think that we need to focus. You need to focus on those positive elements, rather than, if you focus on the negative, that's all you'll see, and that will encompass your worldview. So you really have to, the way I look at it is just like that wave equation in that Hamiltonian. You have your potential energy, and you have your kinetic energy, and it's where you apply that wave function will determine how those potentials and your actual physical kinetic energy collapse in the wave function in the future. So,
like, what you make of it.
Right. It's what you make of it, and it's whether you put a minus or a plus sign in front of that potential.
Interesting. Yeah, I have no problem with finding problems with things, even in our own society, but it's always like, well, if you're going to tear apart this society, you better have a really good replacement, because Dark Ages suck.
I read today that they uncovered the first mass grave from like 6,000 years ago. So it seems like there's a long, long history of terrible, terrible violence that's always at the edge of human society. That, honestly, society is kind of the only thing that stops mass killing.
Well, you guys like just invented human rights, I think, like 50 years ago or something.
Seriously, it hasn't been that long.
We probably don't have any rights when we get there.
No, probably haven't gone that far.
Then your rights, I don't know. It's a crazy world right now, what you have the right to do and don't have the right to do. It's because it seems like rich people, doesn't matter what the law is, because as long as you have enough money to pay off the lawyers and pay off the judge and pay off the district attorney's office, and if you got enough money, it doesn't matter what you do, I guess, to a certain extent.
Why do you think the discussion doesn't start there always? It's like humans seem to be really tied up about all these political things, but it's like, I think there's really only one political issue, and you just nailed it on the head.
I think a lot of people in power right now use politics as a tool to create division within our population, to get people fighting with each other, instead of, because that's one thing they're afraid of is people, like smart people, coming together and getting good ideas and saying, hey, look, let's work on a way to topple the energy, to solve the energy crisis, right? So we look at it as solving the energy crisis, and this is an argument of language, because they see us as we're solving the energy crisis, but to them we're threatening their stranglehold on energy hegemony, or on world dominance of energy, and their ability to control and get lots of money through their control over energy. And so they don't view that the same way as we view it, because it's, to them, it's a threat to their way of being and their well-being and their way of life. And the fact that they need to, stand on the corpses of thousands of dead children in third world countries in order to have, a better standing for themselves. And it's kind of the society that we've brought up. And it's like, here in America, we complain about the most, ridiculous, like little trivial things. And meanwhile, we do that through our $1,000 iPhone that was made in a factory in Malaysia by some 13-year-old who was handcuffed to a machine 14 hours a day. So where do you draw the line? I mean, what are we doing with ourselves? Like it's kind of a sick society in some ways, because we view our success based on how many people we can enslave to make our own lives better. Basically, it's in order to make our lives better, we don't care about the costs in some ways, and we go through. We actually go out of our way to hide those issues and pretend that they don't exist. To exploit that labor and manufacturing to third world countries or whatever, and why are there suicide nets outside these iPhone factories in these countries? And it's kind of crazy, the society that we've created for ourselves.
Well, it's interesting because it doesn't seem like slavery is a particularly new idea. I think it goes back at least to the beginning of your written history in almost every culture. So
right, that's kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the older generation being this owning class that just buys up and owns everything, and we're just basically a subscription based economy, a society where we have to like pay for everything, pay for the air you breathe, pay for rent, pay for your we're basically slaves. You're just basically telling us we're slaves. It's exactly what we are. If we can't own anything, if nothing's ours to own and we have to constantly pay for everything, then you're telling me that I'm a slave. I can't ever own property.
By degrees, I can see what you're saying.
I mean, it changes with time, right? So it's actually fascinating. If you look at the etymology of the word slave versus the word job, they have an exact inverse correlation. So I think that you can do it if you just Google it. But with the abolishment of slavery at the end of the Civil War in the United States, the use of the word slave started to slowly fall because it wasn't that popular around the world anymore, since the institution was gone from most countries. And what it was replaced by was job. And that's kind of the world that people live in right now, right? Where there's this sense of, well, you get a job, and maybe one day you'll run the company, kid. But
work your way to the top of that corporate ladder.
Yeah, exactly. Or to the top.
It's owned by some family that's always owned it.
Well, there's just too many people and not enough ladders. That's the thing. Like, if you had gotten way more ladders to climb, then maybe that would still be true. But more and more people seem like they're centrally employed by institutions, by companies, because, well, arguably you could say that those companies do a better job of producing things, right? Like, there's not a mom and pop competitor to Apple, right? Or Google, or
No.
Tesla. I guess Tesla's kind of a mom and pop, but not really.
Right.
But so you just don't have, you need massive, massive, massive structures to accomplish things on a global scale. And most people will go work in those positions, and it's not possible to rise to the top of that hierarchy because, instead of a company of 100 people and one person at the top, now it's a company of 100,000 people with one person at the top. And that's just how it goes. So the more people who can start their own projects and actually get them off the ground like you, the better the world will be, right? At least I think so.
Well, I hope so. I mean, if there's anything I learned by this time of my life, 38, and going through the workforce and work field and having a lot of different jobs, I realize that you have to, if you want it, you have to build your own ladder. You can't just rely on somebody else's ladder or wait in line for the next ladder that comes along, or you have to build your own ladder sometimes. And that's, what I did when I went out on my own with my own business a couple of years ago doing construction work instead of working under someone. I said, I'm going to start. I could get my insurance and my license with this. When I got my taxes back, I went and got my insurance and my license, and then I started working for myself and bidding my own jobs and being my own boss. Forcing my own self to get up in the morning to go to my own work. And then having to keep track of it. So it's not everyone can do that. I understand, but and sometimes you have to work up to that and save up for it, and wait for the opportune time until you can do it, and then just and yeah. So I don't know. It's a lot to be said about that, but I think what we're doing right now is the right thing. Starting out with the grassroots movement of a bunch of people that are just super interested in this already, and creating this hub or this environment where they can all get together and talk with what we're doing, and these discussion groups and chats that we've set up, and these conferences. I'm not sure. We've debated if we can't continue to up the quality of the guests that we're going to have in this conference, because I don't want it to just evolve into we're just bringing anyone on. I would really like to get better quality guests onto this conference and and open it up to more people. But if we can't do that, we might close it down for a couple months and then restart it again in the fall. And I think in the meantime, I might take some of the better people that we've met through these conferences and just interview them individually on my channel. Me do like a one-on-one with them, and or get different people on to debate each other. That's always fun. There's been some really entertaining and colorful emails being exchanged within some of these groups, including some rather funny insults and character cartoons and stuff like that. It's a lot of funny business going on, and I would love to get these colorful characters out and on my channel to discuss these things in an open environment and kind of and hash them out, because it's certainly been fun doing this collaborative effort, but where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, it also gets a little crowded, and so it might be cool to back off and just do some individual interviews and stuff. That's what we're thinking about in the next couple of months here with the direction we want to go in with the channel. So
cool. I'm looking forward to that.
Do you have any advice for people looking to pursue their interests in an independent way like you have?
I would definitely talk to experience is the best teacher, I would say. If you're going to learn, you want to talk to someone who's done this before, to someone who has some experience. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's hard to find people with experience, especially if you're trying new things or doing new things. But I tend to look at, use experience as your teacher. I mean, I come up with so many crazy ideas that I think of as $1 million ideas that are just, I don't know, it's all about looking at. You can't just look at experience too, what other people do, because sometimes you have a new idea that's something different that is really valuable and will make a lot of money. So definitely look for experience, but also understand intellectual property and your ideas are valuable, and how to understand how to work with intellectual property and protect your intellectual property. It's a long battle, because sometimes if you want to do that, you got to write your own patents and apply for your own patents and get your own patents. And in order to write a patent, you really need to be an attorney almost, or you need to hire a patent attorney to help you with the patent, or you're never going to get it through. And then how do you hire the right people? And then there's these companies, these patents online companies that you write to them, and then they're just basically idea stealing farms, and they patent the thing for you, but they stole your idea.
Wow.
And so you got to watch out about those. And there's So you got to be careful. Definitely, go talk to other people who have done it before if you can, and find, or find people who are doing something similar and listen to their stories, listen to their advice, because experience is the best teacher out there. Nothing beats doing it, right?
Yeah,
And getting your hands dirty.
always true.
So we only got a few minutes left, and I wanted to ask you a question I ask all the humans at the end. And maybe you've already addressed this a little bit, but what do you think's the biggest threat to your species or to your civilization in the next decade or century or year or 5 minutes? What's the scariest thing, and what do you make of it?
Right. Well, right now, if you ask the mainstream media, they might tell you it's the coronavirus. But looking at history of diseases and viruses, humanity survived the Black Plague without modern medicine. I don't think we have to worry about. A lot of people might die if a virus got out of control, but I don't think it would necessarily be the end of humanity altogether, right? So let's take that out the picture of the biggest threat to humanity. It's definitely not a biggest threat. I would actually view government, in my opinion, I feel like government tyranny and the kind of infrastructure that we're setting up in response to this coronavirus thing is actually more of a threat to the future of our civilization than the virus itself, arguably, in my opinion.
And what infrastructure are you seeing come up that you are worried about?
I'm worried about just an environment of this whole future that they're portraying. That what looks like they're trying to build. There's been a lot of it looks like they're almost trying to push us towards this new type of society, and with laws and stuff, and a slavery. I don't know if you've played Half-Life or one of these other, like these video games where we live in this dystopian future where there's just a small elite group of people that absolutely control everything, and that the rest of us are all just complete slaves. And they have total freedom of information over all of us to track and watch all of us and spy on all of us, but we can never spy on these people and know what they're doing in their ivory towers and these rich people. And that is definitely going on right now. I feel like there's wealthy people right now that are concentrating that wealth in the hands of fewer and fewer individuals, while basically turning the rest of society into slaves. For lack of a better term, I mean, we talked about having a job versus slavery and stuff, but yeah, I feel like we're all going towards a slave society in the future. I think that it's a slippery slope, and that 1984, the dystopian future, is a lot more probable than a utopian future. And the only difference that makes that is freedom, freedom of humans. And the more freedoms we continue to give up and sacrifice, I feel like in the future you're going to have less freedoms, and with less freedom comes, less opportunities and less potential, more restricted potential in that wave function. So I think we have to be very careful of the steps that we take now in the future of the planet, and what we're sacrificing and what we're gaining by making those sacrifices, and what we're giving up. And make really educated and thoughtful decisions on what we're doing with our society and what we are afraid of. Because I tell you what, I'm a lot more afraid of my government than I am of getting sick. Sorry.
And spending some effort trying to imagine what that new government looks like too. Seems like just throwing it out wouldn't be very fun either.
Yeah, I think that AI and autonomous voting, the voting machines that have been given to us and developed, those systems, I feel like they could be replaced by blockchain technology or some of these other technologies easily, for more a voting system that doesn't restrict voters and is more safe and reliable and less susceptible to fraud. I feel that is essential, probably one of the most essential things that we can do in the next 4 years.
Transparent.
Yeah, a transparent election where there can't be this issue that there was with the last election, where half the entire country is screaming fraud, and then half of the people are saying no, just shut up and deal with it. And it's sort of it's like no, things need to change. We need a different system in place. It's sort of I've had this argument about mainstream media and the argument that we live in a duopoly. We don't even have a choice of who we get to be our president. We're given two options from the ruling elite, and that's all we get to choose from here. And we don't actually have a real vote, and that it's not given to us by the media. They've given us two options, and they say you're throwing away your vote if you vote for anyone else but these two candidates who are pre-selected that we've given to you. I think that's dangerous in the future for democracy and for the future of our planet, and especially our government, because we need to get money out of politics. This is the biggest thing. Money is corrupt as heck. We have all these rich, stupid people making all the rules, and we need to kick them out and prevent them from making rules. And we need to make rules that prevent them from getting rich, and prevent and take their money away and give it to more charitable and amicable causes that will help the planet, rather than force us all into slavery, because that's what's profitable.
You think a third party is possible in your future of your country?
If we get the voting issue fixed and the infrastructure, yeah, if we can get that fixed. But up until then, I think they've got it pretty much locked down. They understand the whole process of elections and the whole game that needs to be played. I've watched it run. I watched it run like a script every election since I started paying attention to these things in college at age 18 with the Bush and Kerry election, where it was revealed they were both members of the same secret society in college, but they were running against each other. No, they're
high-fiving backstage and stuff.
They're sworn blood brothers to a secret oath that we as the public don't even have a right to know or read or know what that secret oath was. So it's quite revealing, I believe, of what the whole system is and how contrived it really and truly is, and how hostile it is to outsiders or anyone that actually comes in and wants to change things.
And that seems reflected on all levels, right? You see it in politics, you see it in science. You probably see it in the cultural world too. We should talk to somebody about elections.
We should.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. James O'Keefe. No.
Yeah.
Man,
probably be into aliens.
It's weird. He was on Tim Pool's show like a week after I saw him. I was like, hey, I was sitting right in that chair.
It's so funny.
It's funny, man. Well, we're all connected. I feel that you're going to have lots of interesting people sitting in my chair on your show and in the future, and it's kind of cool to. I think I found you guys one time. I was searching for alien scientists, and I think I found you guys a couple months ago. I was like, wow, there's somebody else who has the idea for alien scientists and stuff, and I think that's great. That you guys are the real deal. I mean, sorry, you guys are the real alien scientists.
Technically, you guys are aliens to us, but
Yes,
I'll let it slide.
True. So I'm like the Earth alien scientist. Okay. No, it's cool, man, and I think that we're gonna have a lot of. I think that you guys are doing a good thing for getting people to break outside their shells and think outside the box, because there's going to be a time in the future where we're going to be talking to lots of different creatures like yourselves.
I believe it.
Theirs is a little box and the world is big.
Well, it's been really fun, Jeremy. I hope we can talk again sometime.
Definitely, guys. Take care.
Yeah,
Thank you.
See ya.
Nanu.